Hello, my name is Ryan from Buster Beagle 3D, and today I'm going to be reviewing the F1 Ultra, which is a 20-watt fiber and 20-watt diode laser combo machine. You may have seen the last review I did on the original F1 machine, but this machine is very different for a number of reasons. It's larger, faster, stronger, and has a bunch of other upgrades. So what do I think of this machine? And is it the right combination laser for you? Well, let's find out. First, as always, I wanted to thank xTool for sending me this machine for my honest review. There are affiliate links in the video description that do help out the channel, but they do not affect my opinion one way or the other. With that out of the way, let's get started. To the point of being a broken record, when I talk about any xTool machine, it came extremely well packed to where you would be very hard pressed to get a machine with damage even with the most aggressive package delivery service. It came with everything you need, including a nice little test material pack, instructions, as well as all the necessary cables and tools. The machine is also completely assembled right out of the box, so other than a calibration that is recommended you run after first receiving the F1 Ultra, it's ready to go right away. The F1 Ultra is a galvo laser that combines two different laser technologies into one package. The first is a 20-watt diode laser that works best on engraving and cutting of more natural materials such as wood, leather, paper, food, as well as glass and opaque acrylic. The F1 Ultra also has a 20-watt fiber laser that is intended for engraving and carving of metals such as stainless steel, brass, silver, gold, as well as plastics. Together, there are not many things that this machine cannot engrave on. Now, while this might seem similar to the original F1, there are some major differences. First, the original F1 only had a 10-watt diode laser source, but this F1 Ultra has a 20-watt diode laser. The difference, of course, is the power there, but it's the infrared laser that is pretty different. The original F1 had a 2-watt infrared laser, but this F1 Ultra has a 20-watt fiber laser source. While both emit a 1064 nanometer wavelength, the source from the fiber laser runs through fiber wires where it amplifies it out the lens to your workpiece, where the original F1 is emitting from a solid-state laser, much like a diode, which limits the amount of power it can generate. The 10 times more power allows not only for easier marking on the surface of metallic objects, but the deep 3D engraving as well as cutting of metal. More about that in a little bit. The F1 Ultra comes in an enclosure that sits on a footprint of 9.5 inch by 13.5 inches or 204 by 340 millimeters. The machine is well built and is completely surrounded on 3 sides by a green acrylic laser safety shield. This not only protects your eyes while the machine is in use, but also traps in smoke and fumes that are generated while using this machine. All of that smoke and fumes can either be vented outdoors or to the air purifier kit that xTool also sells as an addition to this machine. While this review is not about the air purifier, I have to say I was pretty happy with how well that purifier worked while using this machine, even allowing me to cut wood without venting outdoors with no smoke smell at all. More about the purifier in a little bit. Keeping briefly with the build of the machine, there is also an emergency stop button on the right side that is above the connection from where you would plug in your computer, as well as accessories such as a rotary or a conveyor that I'll talk about in just a moment. There's also a spot for a USB flash drive in case you want to store files to access later on the machine. Below that is a power button for turning the machine on. The machine also comes with an external 4-inch color touchscreen to be able to see what is happening with the machine, as well as the ability to start and stop jobs, and you can even use the buttons on the right to lower and raise the laser head of the machine to the proper focal height and initiate your framing of your work. Speaking of that focal height, unlike the original F1, which would only automatically adjust to the height based on the parameters you entered into the software, the F1 Ultra does have a truly automatic focal height adjustment. You just tell the software to measure the focal distance, and then the laser head will automatically raise or lower to the proper height it needs to be in focus. It's a really cool feature of this machine which takes the guesswork out of whether the laser is at the proper height or not. The F1 Ultra also introduced another feature over the original F1, and that is a 16 megapixel camera that allows you to not only pretty accurately line up your work in the xTool Creative Space software, but also allows for the batch processing of multiple objects at the same time with a smart fill feature that I'll go over in just a little bit. The camera function also does not require the machine to be plugged into the computer, but also works over Wi-Fi, which this machine can also be operated from. I have used the machine both connected to my computer and over Wi-Fi, and they both have worked very well. The machine also has built-in LED lights inside to aid with the camera as well as being able to see what you're doing. The workable area of the machine is 220 by 220 millimeters. Now you can also purchase a conveyor belt that will extend the workable area to 220 by 500 millimeters, or about 8.5 by 19.5 inches. The F1 Ultra also comes with a fin plate to protect the work area and assist with cutting on the machine. Just a side note that the fins of this plate are always supposed to point to the back of the machine to assist with the smoke exhausts. The F1 Ultra also comes with an L-shaped bracket to be able to square up objects to the machine that will attach down to the metal base. Now, when it comes to the speed of the F1 Ultra, it can work at a blazing fast 10,000 millimeters per second. That's really fast. You will not be able to run every job that fast, but when compared to the traditional XY gantry style laser engraver, it's super fast. So the first thing that I did after going through the calibration that I mentioned earlier was a metal business card. I ended up abandoning my first try for two reasons. First, the suction of the exhaust was so great that it started moving my card, as well as the heat generated started to move the card as well. This is why you see those lines here. I realized that I need to have something else to keep the card in place, which is why you see that piece of metal holding the back corner. It turned out really nice, but I also wanted to mention here that not all of these metal business cards are created equal. These are not the thickest cards I've ever used, so you can see the heat of the laser still started to warp the card, which would definitely be minimized with a thicker card. I also ran a picture of Yoda and one of my daughter, which turned out pretty nice. Now, these are things that the original F1 could also do fine, but it's the next item that really is the thing that sets this type of machine apart, and that is 3D engraving, or embossment as it's called in the xTool Creative Space software. I'm also not going to go super deep into the software side in this video, as I'll probably do a standalone video that only deals with the new 2.0 Creative Space, but I wanted to at very least show the different processing modes, and in this case, it's what is called embossment. This is the same thing as 3D sliced and light burn, which is also compatible with this machine. However, all of the tests that I did with this machine so far have been in Creative Space. If you are a subscriber to the channel or have seen some of my other videos, you may have come across a video I made on how I engraved this skull image onto a brass coin using the original F1 machine. However, that really was just a superficial mark on the surface with no real depth. On this F1 Ultra machine, you are fully able to engrave a relief onto the surface with the fiber laser so that you have a real carving in the metal. It's no longer just a mark, but a 3D model that you can touch and feel. You can't simply run the same image on the coin, as you need to have a height map like that line you may have seen in some of the marketing materials for the F1 Ultra. However, xTool has an AI function in their software that will allow you to convert a regular image into a height map so that you can engrave onto the surface. That is what I did with this skull coin from the Imagear website by an artist named Lucas Flotzinger, and I was able to engrave onto this coin. I burned this coin in 256 layers at 100% power and 660 millimeters per second at 300 lines per centimeter and 30 kilohertz frequency. Another cool feature in XCS is that you can have the laser move down as you carve into the coin, so as the layers of brass are ablated away, you can keep the coin in focus as it moves down. I descended the z-axis by 0.01 millimeters every layer, so at 256 layers, the laser head would also have moved down about 2.5 millimeters. Perhaps a little bit too aggressive, but it turned out nice. After the embossment, I did a cleaning pass at 20% power at 4,000 millimeters per second, 300 lines per centimeter at 30 kilohertz frequency. Overall, it took around 4 hours to produce this coin. I then put it in my tumbler polisher with tiny steel balls with water and a few drops of Shine Bright burnishing compound, and then some brass black to darken it, and then some fine steel wool to brush the black away, only leaving recessed areas darkened. Again, it turned out very nice, and it's really my favorite thing to do on a fiber laser. After that, I wanted to try that lined coin that xTool shows in their promo materials, so I found the image on the xTool Design Find site. I loaded it into the software and started burning it onto another coin. After running it with the settings in the file, I noticed that it certainly was not as deep as they show on their site. I then went to the settings that xTool recommends for brass coins, and it's almost twice as slow as I was initially running those files. I had been running to 700 millimeters per second. xTool was recommending 300 millimeters per second. So I ran the coin again at that 300 millimeters per second, and as you can see, the coin turned out much deeper and more detailed. However, that 300 millimeters per second does come with a price, and that price was 8 hours of engraving time. So the slower you go, the deeper you go, but again, it does take some time. This is also the coin straight off of the machine. I've not yet done any further processing to this coin. Next thing I wanted to try out with the fiber laser was a slate 3D engraving. Again, I went over to the xTool Design Find site and found this other height map, so I engraved it onto the slate using the slate settings from xTool. This is another moment where I was very happy that I had not only the enclosure, but also the air purifier to keep all of this slate dust out of my work area. The engraving was nice and deep and looked pretty good. You could really see how detailed it was when I held it up to the light. However, I just wanted a little bit more contrast like I get with my brass coins with that brass black, so I ended up spray painting the carved area with a matte black spray paint, and then using the same image that I used to carve the coaster, I inverted it so that the raised sections were black, and then adjusted the grayscale so only the brightest areas would show up. I then placed the coaster back onto the machine, and this time only ran the engraving pass, which removed the paint and brightened the top relief sections. I ran this with the fiber at a 300 dot duration, 30% power, and 800 dpi. It came out very nice, and I had not tried this before, but was very happy with the effect that I had, and it really brought the figures out. After that, I wanted to hop back over to the diode laser, and again found this image of an eagle on the Design Find site, so I dropped the fin plate and the wood that came with the machine into it and lined everything up. This is also the largest width that you can engrave with this machine without the conveyor that I'll show in a second. I also wanted to point out here that, as you can see, this wood is larger than what would fit in the enclosure, but unless you have the setting stops when enclosure open checked in the software, you will still be able to run without being able to close the machine completely. However, do keep in mind that you may smell some of the smoke and fumes coming out of the machine. Also, you need to make sure that you wear some sort of laser safety glasses whenever using this machine open, which are not included in the kit, as it's mainly meant to be used closed. So I burned this eagle onto the wood, and it worked just as you would have expected it to with the 20W diode laser. Just keep in mind that you do not want to use the fiber laser on wood, cardboard, or paper, as it'll probably just ignite, so you want to make sure with those materials you are using the diode instead. After I engraved the image, I wanted to test cutting out those extreme boundaries for this machine, and I was able to cut right through it in one pass. However, this brings up something that I wanted to mention about using this machine for cutting. Two things really. The first is that since the laser source is a beam from pretty far away, there's nothing right above where the laser is hitting, such as an air assist to blow out the kerf or the material that the laser is actually burning out with each pass. This means that not only can you potentially have more charring on a cut since there's nothing to blow that out, but you could much more easily start to burn the material. You can even see a small flame following where I was cutting out with this laser. Now, it never really ignited the wood and it worked without any incident, but cutting with this machine is really something you want to make sure you're watching while doing it to be able to catch any potential flare-ups. Again, you should always be watching with a flammable material in the machine, but especially while cutting. The second issue that this brings up is that the cuts with this machine will never give you a square cut. This machine is a galvo laser. That means that the laser doesn't move, but tiny little mirrors inside the lens do. This makes it so that it can move incredibly fast, but also means that the beam always originates from the center and not directly above where you're making your cuts. That makes it so that the further you cut out from the center, the more angled the cut is going to be. This might not be a big deal for many cuts, but especially if you were trying to make a puzzle or other items that interconnect, just know that the connections will not be square. After this, I ran these fake leather patches that came with the machine. The machine makes quick work of this. I sped it up, but it took about 1 minute and 15 seconds to complete. After that, I was back to the fiber laser for these little dog tags. Now, with this, I was able to simply engrave this dog image into the stainless steel. It turned out pretty nice, but was a little rough on the surface. Now, there is another technique when using a fiber laser to get a dark black mark on stainless steel that's called a Z-mark black. This entails adjusting the settings as well as the focal height to mark the surface in black without engraving deep into it. So what I did was autofocus the dog tag, and then using the buttons on the touchscreen, I was able to lift the platform about 4 millimeters. I then ran the dog tag again at a dot duration of 400 at 50% power and 800 dpi using Jarvis and 30 kilohertz frequency. You can see that I was able to get a nice dark black mark on the surface using that technique. I then inverted this image and burned it on to another aluminum dog tag that came with the machine. This is running in real time. It really did it this fast, and the image turned out really detailed and nice. The kit also had this necklace, so using the fiber laser and again raising the focus about 4 millimeters higher and using the same settings as the Z-mark black as before, I burned a name onto this necklace. Just as before, it worked really well. The kit also came with this almost suede-looking pouch, so I ran that as well, and just as usual, it came out really nice. I also wanted to point out that if I don't explicitly tell you the settings that are in this video, then I really just use the recommended settings for these objects in the xTool creative space and just chose the objects and ran them. The last thing before I move on to the conveyor for this machine was that xTool sent me a material pack that had a bunch of goodies in it that don't come standard with this machine, but allowed me to play with a few other things. One thing in there were these little fake AirPod cases for using with testing settings before I went to engrave on some real AirPods. First, I ran a bunch of tests on the plastic to figure out what worked best for me, and I found that 15% power at 900 millimeters per second, 240 lines per centimeter, and 30 kilohertz frequency gave me a pretty nice and dark mark. I then tried to run the pattern on these fake AirPod cases, and the bottom turned out nice, but the top didn't work well. I'm guessing that for whatever reason, the top plastic is slightly different than the bottom, and not the same material. I tried again on this other fake AirPod case, and again it worked really nice. So after I was confident in the results, I went ahead and tried it on my real AirPod case, and it turned out nice once again. So now on to the peripherals that can be used with this machine. First, I will mention that the RA2 Pro rotary is compatible with the F1 Ultra. However, I seem to have misplaced my cable to attach it currently, so I couldn't complete any tests with it. It uses that same cable from the original F1. It's not a USB-C cable, but some sort of squared-off USB-C light cable. But again, I need to find it or buy another one. I was able to test with that conveyor that xTool sent me with this machine. The conveyor is roughly 1,000 millimeters or 40 inches long and bolts directly onto the base of the F1 Ultra. With this attached, you can add two different modes to the machine, which are called Use Conveyor Large and Use Conveyor Batch. First, I will talk about Use Conveyor Large. All this means is that you can place an item on the conveyor that is longer than the workable area of the machine, and it will slowly move it along while it engraves onto the surface. Just like I was talking about before with other pieces of wood that was too large to fit in the machine, while using the conveyor, it means that you will not be able to fully close the enclosure, so you may end up getting some smoke smell, and you want to make sure that you protect your eyes if the beam is ever exposed. Another thing to keep in mind is that as of the filming of this video, you are limited to the max size that you can extend your engraving to, which is 500 millimeters wide. It also feels like this is a little short, and I wish they would extend that a little further, even when only using the conveyor and no other support structures. I had this very long cutting board laying around, so I decided to burn that same eagle I had from before, but now a longer version. Problem was, I didn't have a longer version, so just a little quick side note, I dropped the image into Photoshop, and using their AI generation tools was able to quickly add art to this image, as well as a wooden flagpole, to be able to test this on this board. It was a bamboo board, and I wish I went a little darker, but the overall effect was achieved. The one thing that was really important to do was to measure the distance from the edge of the board to the edge of the conveyor to make sure that everything was square. It came out very nice and straight, and it did an excellent job. Again, I hope they extend the workable area to be a little bit longer in the future, as I would have liked to have even engraved a longer image, but 500 millimeters is still longer than the base D1 Pro can do. You are also, of course, limited to the original height of the workable area, but the added width is a nice function. So the next thing you can do with the conveyor is called Use Conveyor Batch Mode. You may have seen this in some of the xTool's promo materials, and what this is for is being able to set up one item, and then the software will use the camera to find all versions of that shape on the conveyor and burn onto them. You can then keep piling the items on the conveyor, and it will continue to find and burn onto them as long as you load them on. So I wanted to try this on another item I got in that separate material pack from xTool, and it was these wooden keychains on a leather strap with a metal ring on them. What you do is set up the artwork once, and then tell it to frame out the object, and then it will start to process that art on anything it thinks matches that piece. So I set it up and it worked, but with a few little caveats. First, there are some limitations on what you can use this batch function with, and I think this keychain is pushing into one or two of those limitations slightly. The issue here is that the leather strap and the metal ring are not always going to match perfectly to one another, so it may throw off the reading of the overall shape. As you can see, there were some that worked out very nice, but some were a little off or skewed. The other thing that you really want to be careful of is how close you put that artwork to the border, because if you have it too close and there's even a slight issue, you may end up engraving off of the intended object, which is what I accidentally did. When you do that, you can end up damaging the conveyor, which I did, but it wasn't too bad. Some other limitations are that you can't use objects that are too close in color to the belt, or it may have trouble seeing them. You also cannot run this on super highly reflective objects that are too thick. That may have been another issue with my keychain, since the camera is still set up from a single point and uses some sort of camera skew math to flatten everything out. At only 4 millimeters tall, the camera was still capturing the side of the keychain, which may have been throwing off the calculations. It also doesn't work with items under 10 millimeters in length, or things like rings, necklaces, or other small and complex objects. So given all of that, I think it's a cool feature if you want to engrave on a lot of simple wood pieces or thin, simple objects. But if you really wanted to use the fiber laser with the metal and reflective objects, then it does not really excel at that. Also, keep in mind that unlike the original F1 that had a moving table instead of the conveyor, you will not be able to cut on this conveyor. On the original F1, it had a thin plate, so that was something you could achieve, but that is not the case here. Also keep in mind that you do not need the conveyor to run a batch function with this machine. You can still fill up the workable area with the same kind of objects that you would be throwing onto the conveyor and run a batch function that way. The difference here is that you will be able to see right away any issues that arise after the batch function is run before committing and engraving on them, and can manually fix any mistakes. It's not a never-ending assembly line, but depending on how large your objects are, you can still fit a good amount of items on there, and you can fully close the enclosure. So before I go into my overall thoughts on this machine, I also want to mention that there is a new function coming out soon, and that is their engraving on 3D objects. It seems like it would work very similar to the curved surface engraving that works on both the P2 and S1 machines from xTool. It's not available just yet, but something that I hope to be able to test out soon. Okay, so now for my overall thoughts on this machine, and thanks for sticking with me. I know it's been a bit of a long one. As I have said before, there are few machines out there that match the build quality of the xTool machines. I am more than a little impressed at the speed at which they have been able to innovate not only their machines, but you can't also forget how much xTool Creative Space has grown to support those machines, and for this F1 Ultra, that is certainly the case. I absolutely love the fact that this machine comes with a full enclosure built into it. If you've seen my other videos on other fiber lasers, I've been basically begging for this feature for a while now. It is so imperative to have some sort of air extraction feature, especially when dealing with a fiber, as you really do not want to be breathing in brass dust or slate dust. The enclosure does a really good job of keeping everything nice and contained. Also, their air filter does a great job of capturing that material as well. You can see here just how much of that material was captured in this first washable filter. I can't stress enough how much you don't want that in your lungs. Also, the size they give you to work with. The camera seems to be one of the most accurate cameras that I have used on a laser to date, and it was pretty easy to use. The autofocus function worked really well, and xTool Creative Space gives you a decent amount of settings to use as a starting point to get the projects made in a relatively short period of time. The touchscreen is big and nice and gives you even more options of how to use this machine, and you can even purchase a button or a foot pedal for controlling the machine in a more batch processing mode. So that is what I like about the machine. And now for things that I wanted to discuss about this machine. Now, normally I don't bring up costs in these videos as it's ever changing and not really the point of these videos. At the time of the recording in the US, this machine retails for about $4,000 for the standalone unit, all the way up to $5,200 for the deluxe bundle with the RA2 Pro, the conveyor, and the smoke purifier. Now, I understand that it's not a cheap item to pick up. The problem is that for my cheap brain, you can get a 20-watt fiber laser for less than half of this machine. However, honestly, you can even pick up some 60-watt fiber lasers for cheaper than this. Do those fiber lasers come with a combo of a diode laser? No. Do they come with a full enclosure? No. Do they come with a touchscreen and an autofocus? No. Do they come with easy-to-use integrated software to run them? Kind of, but really no. However, going back to that brass coin that I showed you, I can run a deeper engraving in 2 hours with a 60-watt fiber laser than I could with this 20-watt fiber laser in 8 hours. So if deep engraving on metal is the most important thing to you, then power is also very important. Now, this F1 Ultra also has the diode laser as well, but just personally, I would have rather had a more powerful fiber or even a MOPA fiber laser in there rather than the dual combo of lasers. Just in case you don't know what a MOPA fiber laser is, it adds another function called pulse width that allows for consistent colors to be engraved on stainless steel, as well as some other functions. I didn't even test colors with this fiber, as it's my experience that it's hard to get consistent outcomes without that MOPA feature. But I digress, and it really comes down to I would rather have a powerful fiber laser and a separate diode machine. Now, arguably, that may be because I already have many lasers, including diode, CO2, and fiber lasers. But if you don't have that kind of setup, then this machine that does both may just be what you're looking for. It really is a nice machine, and I can see it working well in schools or small businesses where you really need to make sure that safety is the top priority. But that's just what I think. Let me know in the comments what you think about this machine. I wanted to once again thank xTool for providing me with this machine for my honest review of it. Again, there are affiliate links in the video description that do help out the channel if you use them, but either way, I hope you found this information useful. Thanks again for watching. If you like this video, please do hit that thumbs up button and consider subscribing for more content having to do with laser engravers, 3D printers, and all things maker. Drop a comment. Share this video. It all does really help the algorithm. You're a champion if you made it this far to the end. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.